and our dear friend Larry Johnson is here with us. Welcome back, Larry.
I'm glad you found the shirt there, brother.
Larry, let's start with what has happened in Venezuela. The Trump
hmm
administration somehow managed to kidnap the Venezuelan president, the legitimate president of Venezuela, and they mm, they brought him to the United States. And when you look at the pictures, when I first saw the pictures of the Maduro, and bringing him, in that sort of, it was unbelievable, somehow dark to see this sort of behavior on the part of the Trump administration. You remember, I remember, the picture that the Israeli government published, the last moments of Yahya Sinwar. They thought that those pictures would somehow, diminish the character of Yahya Sinwar, but it turned out to be, could be the opposite way. People would see this in a different lens. When you look at what has happened with the whole operation, what is your understanding?
the story we're being told publicly is not what actually happened. Um, what we know for certain is that Maduro is in custody. Was kidnapped, but apparently there was a very elaborate deal negotiated with that involved Qatar playing a sort of a go-between, and it looks like uh, this is I'll call it a reprise of the kill bin Laden mission that took place, now what, 15 years ago. Because you remember in that mission, uh, the the Navy SEALs, the SEAL Team 6 that flew in to capture bin Laden, um, they didn't face any opposition. There was no air defense system shooting at them, and other contemporaneous reports from the Pakistani side at the time showed that basically the Pakistanis turned off all the electricity. Um, there had been the United States had finally confronted Pakistan on the fact that they were harboring Bin Laden, and basically Pakistan stood back and let the United States um, come in and grab Bin Laden. Um, that's what happened here. Uh, the there was no air defense system in operation against these helicopters. They were carrying members of Delta Force, and these helicopters are flown by a group called Task Force 160. The so um, this was apparently, though, Maduro was guarded by 32 or more Cuban guards, and they were killed. Again, we don't know the circumstances. If uh, I find it a little hard to believe that these Delta Force guys, rappel down out of their helicopters, or they're flying in little birds where they could just jump off and immediately run around and start shooting. Uh, Perhaps that's what happened, but the new acting president, this Delcy Rodriguez, she has ties to Qatar, and she was also the oil minister. It looks like there was some sort of deal in place, and maybe even Maduro, if you've watched if you've watched him with the photographs, he looks like he's still on the campaign trail. He's sitting there giving the two thumbs up. um, yeah, and he's smiling in some cases. I mean, it's very, very weird. So um, this is a play by the United States to get control of the oil in Venezuela. And then that brings the question, why? This isn't just for the U.S. economic situation. This is I believe it's a prelude to an attack on Iran. And the reason for that is The planners anticipate that when the attack on Iran comes by Israel with U.S. assistance, that the Iranians will shut down the Persian Gulf. The oil will stop flowing out of Saudi Arabia, in particular, but also out of Iran, and that they'll have an alternative source here with Venezuela, which means get the U.S. oil companies in there and start pumping that oil. I mean, this is so people shouldn't look at this in isolation. This is something far more complicated.
Larry, what is the accusation against Maduro in the United States?
Well, they put out an extensive indictment. And look, I've one of my friends, retired CIA operations officer. He was actually the chief of the Latin American division. Uh, I wrote a piece the other day, and he really took exception to it. Now, from his standpoint and the way it's viewed within the U.S. intelligence community, Maduro was a very, very bad guy. But the problem I see with the indictment is one of the claims in the indictment is that he was facilitating drug trafficking by the Sinaloa cartel, which is up in Mexico, which I find very strange because why would the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico go all the way south to Venezuela to try to import cocaine into the United States? But it made accusations about his relationship with FARC and drug trafficking. The FARC is a Colombian group that has been fighting the government of Colombia since 1964. So it's only been around for 61 years, all right? Um, the problem with that indictment is it doesn't have specifics. So, I've been involved with writing indictments or criminal complaints or complaints against, money launderers. And so one of the things you'd put in there are details like on December 15th, Nicolas Maduro met with the leader of the FARC or Sinaloa cartel at such and such location and discussed X, Y, and Z and decided to take certain actions, which led to, you get to those level of specifics. You don't have that in this indictment. You have what I call guilt by association. Now, I'm not saying that Maduro was not involved with those activities, but when you read the indictment, it's very much of a more it's a political document. It's not an actual litany of specific crimes. So it's going to be interesting to see when this actually comes to trial, what success the government will have in trying to make its case. But and anyway, that's like it's uh, Maduro is no longer relevant. Uh, he's been taken out of the picture, much like Bashar al-Assad was taken out of the picture in Syria. And again, there was there were a lot of dealing going on behind the scenes that's not visible to the public. They're fed a narrative, and in this narrative, the United States bravely strikes out to take out this dictator. Uh, what we see, though, in Venezuela still is that the Venezuelan military is intact. There are apparently no U.S. troops on the ground. Uh, there was some sort of deal cut where basically the United States would get to haul out Maduro. The United States may get access to the oil industry again, and they'll try to make life will go on.
Donald Trump is for such a long time was arguing when he was running against Democrats and during his first administration and second administration right now, he always said that the regime change is a failure, is not going to work. And right now he's doing the same. He's turning into, you know, a some sort of regime change, apparatus,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
his government is somehow amazingly, they're arguing that the situation with Venezuela is somehow different from what has happened in Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. Do they really know? Because Marco Rubio says that. Marco Rubio, it seems that he feels that he's an expert of Latin America. No one else knows anything about Latin America.
Right. The Judge Napolitano, I saw his interview earlier with Alistair Crook, and he put together this montage of what Trump is saying now about, "Oh, we're going to run Venezuela," essentially regime change, and then what Trump was saying 4 years ago about how regime change is out of the question. Uh, and what's sort of frightening about this montage that the judge put together, his producer Chris did it, is how Trump has changed. Trump is the other day. I don't know if you saw his like he's slurring his words and talking real slow, and he's not right. He is mentally his age is showing through dramatically, but uh, he has now put the United States in the position of trying to manage regime change. Look, the problem, what I have seen, good Lord, going back, 40 years. So when I was first exposed to CIA operations in Central America, um, when they set up the Central American Task Force to manage the effort to try to overthrow the Sandinistas, defeat the Sandinistas, the guy they put in charge of it was a fellow named Alan Fires. And Fires, his background was he worked with the Arabs in the Middle East. That was his targets before. And uh, they brought in a lot, and within CIA, there's sort of a hierarchy. Latin America was always considered sort of a backwater, um, because it wasn't your very best intelligence officers were considered in places like the Middle East. So they came in with this attitude of superiority and really viewed the Central Americans with disdain, like they're not that smart people. I called it the little brown people approach. Pat the little brown people on the head. Kind of, you're very patronizing towards them. And yet, what I watched as an analyst is all these really smart gringos, uh, like in the case of the Hondurans are running circles around us. The Hondurans were were it turned out to be the great manipulators, not the United States, and I think that's what they're going to discover also in Venezuela. They do have a knack for they're not going to be directly confrontational and pick a direct fight with the United States, but good Lord, to try to control what goes on in that country economically, with all the smuggling that's taken place back and forth across the borders between Colombia and Venezuela, and then Venezuela and Brazil. They just don't have an understanding of it in Washington.
I don't know how much of Venezuelan oil can they bring to the market, because the infrastructure is not that much prepared for that. And it's a long-term strategy, if that's the strategy. And how did you find the reaction on the part of the Venezuelan government and his, the vice of Maduro and the people in Venezuela?
Well, there's still based on the public comments, they're not giving in to this, and they reject the U.S. interference. Um, the the new acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, she has an interesting background. I don't know if you've seen the interview that Max Blumenthal did with her. It was a couple of years ago, but her father was a victim of CIA torture and died in prison. Um, the CIA has had a long-standing involvement in Venezuela, and it goes back, decades. And it's always sort of stuck in its craw that, when Hugo Chavez took over, and won. He initially he was won the election. He was democratically elected. Um, we then went on a campaign to discredit him. Now he did things on his own to discredit himself, but the worm didn't really turn until he nationalized the oil industry, PDVSA, PDVSA. Um, uh, it is, that took money out of the pockets of Exxon, and we've got to, we know through history that uh, oil companies exert a lot of influence over the CIA in terms of working in partnership with the CIA to overturn governments. I think I think there is something that happened in Iran, 70 years ago, with a fellow named Mossadegh, uh, who had the audacity to try to get control of these oil companies. And the reason, you've got to look at this, the economics of it. In the past, when the Exxon was running the Venezuelan oil fields, it was extracting the wealth, but the wealth was not being reinvested in the country to raise the overall income and living standards. Uh, that's what Hugo Chavez and Maduro were supposed to fix. Um, the you know it depends on which narrative you want to follow. The Western narrative basically is the socialism pursued by Chavez, and then Maduro has stripped the economy, weakened it. Uh, but there's other evidence to suggest that at least over the last 3 years, with Delcy Rodriguez playing an important role in this, there's actually been a revival in the Venezuelan economy. But Venezuela has also been a victim of Western sanctions. So this is Venezuela. I guess is another chess piece on the board of this global chess game, and getting control of it and its natural resources, from at least the standpoint of the United States, is a move necessary in order to try to preserve the U.S. Dominated financial system that has been controlling the world for so long and is now in jeopardy of being overturned as BRICS becomes more important.
Larry, look at this picture here. Let me just bring this. I don't know what is. But the picture, by the way, that I'm trying to share with you, it shows the diminishing importance of Venezuelan oil from 1967 to 2000, because Chavez Maduro government comes in power in 2000. Before that, you see, you know, in the aftermath of their, um, their being in power in Venezuela, you see a drastic reduce in the oil market of Venezuela.
Mhm.
So when you put a lot of sanctions on such a country like Venezuela, how can you imagine the country could grow? And I remember I talked with Alex Craner.
Mhm.
In those old days, he was in Venezuela and he saw the government before, the Maduro Chavez government, and he said that the situation was not that much better than what it is today. And those governments were totally so much friendly with the United States. They were friend of the government in the United States, but the quality of life wasn't good in those days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, remember those the predecessor, Carlos Andres Perez, who was president before Chavez. You know, he was a controlled CIA asset. So the United States government had significant control in Venezuela, and this gets back to uh, the purpose of governments. Are governments going to act in a way that they improve the lives of people? Uh, do people, do their incomes grow? Do they have health care? Are they more secure in their homes? And that's one thing, not to get off topic, but when you look at what has happened in Russia over the last 27 years, go back to 1999, when Putin came into office, the the average the lifestyle, the wealth, the security of the average Russian has increased dramatically, absolutely dramatically. Uh, and that's because Putin hasn't made the policy of going out and getting involved with foreign wars. Whereas in the United States, we've seen a decline, a deterioration in the light in what the sort of the middle class environment. And same thing. You've got this tremendous income inequality in Venezuela, and the growth of this income inequality really creates a lot of political pressures that disrupt societies.
Did you? I don't know if you heard or watched the latest. Donald Trump was talking with the press on on Air Force, I think airplane, and he was asked about the situation with Venezuela, if that's different from what's going on in the Middle East. He somehow was saying that Iran should be prepared for the
Mhm.
attack.
Oh, yeah.
He's watching what's going on in Iran, and if they, as they usually do, if they kill their people, I'm gonna go there and fight Iranian. Is he gonna send weapons? Is he gonna ask Israel to attack Iran, or he's gonna do it by himself?
No, no, no. Israel, I believe. So let's go back over what's happened over the last week. A week ago today, at Mar-a-Lago, Bibi Netanyahu is meeting with Donald Trump. Uh, the day before that, on Sunday, you had this, and you can talk about this because you're in Iran, but the merchants in the central market, they locked down, they closed their shops. There was a protest that started, and the protest was against the inflation, which has been ravaging Iran. But the thing to remember is it's not like this inflation suddenly got worse a week ago. I mean, the inflation's been there all all along through at least the last 3 or 4 months, if not longer. So you get the breakout of these protests, and the protests spread across the country. Now, some want to believe that that was just it's organic, and what I mean by organic is that people woke up one morning and said, damn it, I am so pissed off at this government. I can't live like this. I can't take it anymore. Let's go, go into the streets and began hollering and said, oh, death to the Ayatollah. Well, that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that there are foreign influences that bring money, and you can buy access with people and say, hey, if you get a group of 100 people together to go protest, to get out in the street and say and protest against the government, here's some U.S. dollars for you. I mean, $100 buys you a lot of Iranian currency these days. Uh, and so those protests then were concurrent with Bibi Netanyahu meeting with Trump, seeking permission from Trump to attack Iran again, and building the case, oh, we got to get rid of Iran's ballistic missiles. And throughout the week, as these protests continued, stories started appearing in the Western media saying, "Oh my God, uh, the look at all this strong opposition to the Ayatollah." Now, as you and I had talked about previously, you noted that there is a lot of anger directed at Pezeshkian and his government, and there are elements within the Iranian society that think Pezeshkian's been too accommodating of the West, not being too tough, but too accommodating. Uh, and then all of a sudden, out in Western Iran and Eastern Iran, Baluchistan, out near the Pakistan border, and on the western side, you get some groups emerging with weapons, and they start shooting at Iranian uh, police and security forces, and then so they shoot back. And so it's in that context that you know you get Trump saying, "Oh yeah, you're gonna if you kill those protesters, we're gonna come get you." Yeah, what are you gonna do, Trump? Uh, this is all orchestrated, in my view, and it's orchestrated not so much to create conditions in Iran that will foster a collapse of the government, but to create a narrative in the West that people go, yeah, yeah, we need to intervene to support the Iranian people, and some more regime change, and that's what's going on, I believe. And you're there, you can tell me if you differ, but one of the key groups, um, so you've got the People Mujahideen of Iran, the PMOI, AKA the MEK Mujahideen e Khalq, that were originally, the MEK in particular, was a designated terrorist group by the United States because it had carried out attacks in Iran on U.S. military personnel in the past. It killed two or three. So the MEK was considered a terrorist organization until the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003, rounded the MEK up, and then found, hey, we can use the MEK to attack Iran. And the MEK became a CIA asset. Mossad also got access to it. And MEK operatives in Iran, they've got family members and friends through their network. They were involved in the assassinations of at least six Iranian nuclear scientists back in like 2011, 2012. So that's what's going on right now. That the MEK is trying to prepare Iran for as part of this uh, Israeli preparation to attack. And this brings us back to Venezuela. That the same week, so on Monday, a week ago Monday, Trump's meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, the protests spread, and then there's this taking out Maduro. What was why? Well, if you're planning to attack Iran and you fear that the Iranians will shut down the Persian Gulf, they threatened to do so before, but they didn't. But if they do so, that's going to cut off the flow of oil. If you can have an alternative source in Venezuela, because it's got the largest, uh, you know, quantity in the world in terms of what's available to be extracted. Uh, that I think that is one of the aspects that's playing into this. So that's why we shouldn't view what's going on in Venezuela as separate or independent of what's going on in Iran. And at the same time, you've had, as we talked about last week, you've had this move to push the propaganda that Venezuela has become a safe haven for Hezbollah and Hamas. So it's all uh, it's all stage managed.
How far do they want to go in Latin America, Larry? Because Marco Rubio right now is talking about Cuba. Colombia is in the background. How far is this sort of this so-called Monroe Doctrine would advocate go to, I don't know if they want to come to Brazil, they want to go to Brazil as well, but what is the understanding on their part?
Well, l- let's first clarify what the Monroe Doctrine is. The Monroe Doctrine is not the way it's been interpreted and talked about. In other words, that it gives the United States the right to control this hemisphere, and so we can determine who Colombia, Brazil, Peru, who they can associate with. And if we decide we don't like that foreign group, by God, they don't get to come in. That's not at all what the Monroe Doctrine was. Um, President James Monroe, in a speech to Congress back in 1823, um, it was called the Seventh Annual Address. And as part of that speech, he talked about, say, look, um, we got we, we got all these European colonial powers that have taken territory here throughout, primarily Portugal and Spain. They had taken territory throughout the Western Hemisphere. The Brits too had, they had territories in the Caribbean, and the French, Saint Croix. So uh, his point was, um, we're not going to interfere if one of these European countries has a territory here in this hemisphere. We're not going to interfere with them unless the people in that territory declare independence, want to free themselves, then we'll get involved. So this was all about restricting and limiting the influence of European colonial powers in the Western Hemisphere. Uh, and it was specifically, uh, Monroe laid out non-interference. The United States was not going to interfere. So, for example, Mexico was a colony of Spain, and the United States did not intervene militarily in Mexico to throw the Spaniards out. The Mexicans did that themselves in 1810. But 36 years later, the United States, in violation of the Monroe Doctrine, provoked a war with Mexico in which we took Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of California from the Mexican, because previously that was the territory of Mexico. So this the way the Monroe Doctrine is now being interpreted is that the United States gets to be the final arbiter of which foreign countries can have relations with countries in Latin America. So they're going to use Brazil's relationship with China and Russia through BRICS to target Brazil, but it's going to be done through intelligence channels. It's not going to be overtly military. The United States does not have the military capability, despite Trump bragging about how great we are and how powerful we are. Uh, we just can't afford militarily to get in battles with the Mexicans, with the Colombians, with the Brazilians, and you see, even in the case of Venezuela, we don't have troops on the ground. We got in a surgical strike, killed some bodyguards, and got the hell out.
Actually, he was ridiculing Russia. He said, "Look at what we did in Venezuela, and Russia is for 4 years they're, fighting Ukrainians. They've done nothing. Look at how powerful we are, and look at Russia.
Yeah,
It's amazing."
yeah. Well, and look at the United States. The United States has poured in all of this the supposedly amazing weaponry that would change the world, and it's failed. The what Trump has done here is, I think, finally awakened the Russians and the Chinese to the fact that the United States is crazy. They are dealing with someone who's clinically insane. He's not thinking rationally. It was certainly not interested in building a better world, one that's interested in dominating the world for our own purposes. Uh, I think that this is going to lead to a fundamental shift on the part of Russia from um, the tone with respect to dealing with Trump. Uh, it's not just this; it was the failed attempt to kill Putin, which again took place a week ago. You can't. If you look at these as like separate incidents, you're making a mistake. I think this is part of an integrated strategy, albeit short-sighted, to put Russia on notice, put China on notice, uh, to where the United States is trying to retain its dominant position in the world of international finance. And um, Maduro in this case, he's the sacrificial lamb. Again, I'm not trying to say he was a great guy, a great Democrat, and really improved the lives of his people. But we always like to come up with the villain. You create this villain. By God, he's worse than Hitler, and then therefore we justify taking him out. And does it really actually change anything? I mean, we did it to Manuel Noriega, we did it to Muammar Gaddafi, we did it to Saddam Hussein, uh, Milosevic, and the former Yugoslavia. This um, it really is. It's very much this Hollywood mentality of foreign affairs. Uh, if you've ever had the chance to go to Hollywood to pitch an idea for a movie or a TV series, one of the very first questions the studio heads will ask, so who's the villain? Who's the villain? Got to have a villain. And so we always create these villains and make sure that the problem with Venezuela has been Maduro, or before him Chavez, whereas as opposed, and like Russia, oh, Putin, man, if we just got rid of Putin, boy, by God, things would be better. And it's like, are you shitting me? I mean, really? You think that what's waiting in the wings if Putin disappears is going to be more accommodating and weaker than Putin? That's crazy. Yeah. So um, the West, the West seems to have a death wish and is acting in ways that will be um, potentially devastating for the West, particularly the United States.
I think the point with the Trump administration and is the energy, and they try to somehow dominate the market. But these sort of moves, look at what has happened in Venezuela, in Iran, the same, yeah, the same mindset. Russia attack on tankers, attack on infrastructure in Russia. They won't somehow manage the situation with the energy, with the oil, and but even there was an attack, Larry, on the China Myanmar oil pipeline. When you bring all these data in, you see the policy is the neocon policy, but through the lens of the Trump administration.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't see Russia and China, and even the leadership in Iran, being so dumb to not understand what's going on with this strategy on the part of the Trump administration. Because it's all about the same thing. You can find, different path, different sort of strategy, but the main goal is the same.
Well, I think Russia and China have both tried to avoid a confrontation with the United States. And the United States continues to create reasons for them to have a confrontation with the United States. We've in this country we've been blessed by our geographic isolation. In other words, we've got Mexico on the south, Canada on the north, but they don't create any kind of military threat to the United States. And any other country that wants to attack us has to project force across an ocean. And so, but that hasn't stopped us from doing the exact opposite, where we take our military power and use it around the world to the detriment of other countries in order to benefit ourselves. And we've gotten away with it throughout the 20th century. I mean, really, the last sort of skirmish along the southern border with Pancho Villa back in the 1918, 1919. Other than that, the United States has never faced a threat at home, and we really have never paid any kind of price. Haven't seen our cities burned. We haven't seen our neighborhoods leveled like has happened to the people in Gaza, or is happening. The war that we provoked with the Russians is happening across Ukraine. Uh, one of these days, I fear that war will come home to the United States, um, and once the American people start suffering in that way, only then will the United States start become to change its ways. Because up to this point, it's like you can engage in the most risky behavior possible, and as long as you don't suffer any negative consequences, you keep doing it. You got an incentive to keep doing it, and that's what we're seeing in the West, particularly with the United States. We've not paid any kind of price in terms of blood for our wars in Vietnam. Yeah, 58,000. We build a wall, we cry over it. 58,000's nothing. That many people die every year in a car accident. Okay, and that was 58,000 spread out over 20 years. So it's not a great loss. And similarly, Afghanistan, Iraq. I think maybe the total dead U.S. soldiers from both of those wars was like 4,500, maybe 5,000 over 21 years in Afghanistan. It's nothing. So the um, war has made us. It's been a profitable business in the United States. It's made people very wealthy. Why stop that? So that's how they view all of this. These wars, starting a war with Venezuela, starting a war with Russia, starting. It's a way to make more money.
Is the United States gonna achieve what they have in their mind by removing Maduro from power in Venezuela?
Has it worked anywhere? I mean, that's been the. Let's go back to, hey, if we just get rid of Mossadegh, boy, we'll have control over Iran and things will be peachy keen. How'd that work out? You got the Ayatollah Khomeini. So, uh, Iraq got rid of Saddam. Get rid of Saddam Hussein. That'll magically change it. In Panama, they got rid of Manuel Noriega, but Noriega was succeeded by corrupt governments that were, you know, involved with drug trafficking and other things. So this uh, outside interference to try to alter the course of policies in these particular countries, I don't see. There's not a single instance you can point to where it's turned out successfully, or the success is, like Vietnam has turned out well, not because of U.S. intervention, or let's say as a reaction to U.S. intervention, it has turned out well. They become rich, but it wasn't because of U.S. policy that made them rich. It was defeating the United States and then being able to have some self determination. That's how they got rich.
Yeah. There were times that you and I remember Europe had somehow its own policy, its own sort of stance on many issues, geopolitical issues. Right now, you can you cannot hear anything coming out of Europe, anything constructive. Even
Mhm.
with this attack on Venezuela, they fail to condemn what has happened. And how is Europe seeing its future with this sort of behavior? Ridiculous. They're becoming useless in the international, arena. All these important, I would argue, European countries, you see
Mhm.
nothing coming out of the foreign policy.
Well, again, this has been a slow decline, and what accelerated was Europe's involvement in these wars, World War One, World War Two. That sort of put the final nail in their coffin. Um, we go back to the 19th century, where one of the things that President Monroe was reacting to was you had the French Empire, the British Empire, the German Empire, um, the Dutch Empire, Spanish and Portuguese empires were in decline, but they were all in the 18th century, 19th century. They were fighting amongst themselves for control. And you look back at that, it was this entire continent, ostensibly Christian. Their identity had been forged in battles with the Ottoman Empire, uh, but yet they were fighting amongst themselves for supremacy. And the big conflict was usually between the French and the British, and then the French and Brits combine and they go to war with the Germans in World War One. But out of all of this, where Europe used to be the leader in industry, that was like where the Industrial Revolution really took off, and building factories and manufacturing, you know, just about everything that could be imagined. Militarily, they were extremely powerful. They had the largest armies. Scientifically, the science out of the different universities, scattered across Europe, they were like the Silicon Valley of their era. That's no longer the case. As you point out, Europe is in decline. It's not it's not the leader in anything, or whatever. It may have one or two areas that it is important, but it's no longer an essential continent for global economic wealth, other than it's just managed. It's a financial center, with the city of London in particular managing cash flows. But even on areas such as uh, insurance, Lloyd's of London used to dominate the market in terms of insurance for foreign ships. Well, now they're losing. They are losing market share, and there are alternatives coming up. And Russia and China in particular, is this incredible industrial giant that the West simply cannot match. And the West is desperately trying to uh, constrain China